Hello and welcome to week 5. For week 5, we look at the week as a whole with our overviews, our lessons and presentations, and our assignments. But let's dig into each of those parts. All right, for this particular week, your big goal is to revise your rhetorical analysis. You have now received feedback from 2 peers and me. So, taking all of that into consideration, you want to work on revising that draft so that you can submit the final copy of it toward the end of the week. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about revising and thinking about the order that you want to work through the paper in. A lot of times people will say, oh, I'm revising an essay. I'm going to go back through and make sure, I'll use something like Grammarly or the underlining components of Microsoft Word to make sure that I've got words in the right order, I've spelled everything correctly, I've got capital letters and punctuation. Those are really your later order concerns. Those are the last things you want to do. What you want to do first is look at the genre. In this case, you're doing a rhetorical analysis. So do you have the components necessary in that rhetorical analysis? Do you have a paragraph that digs into ethos, pathos, logos? Have you thought about the author's use of how the author organized the piece? Have you thought about vocabulary or sentence structure? So you want to make sure you've complied with the genre. You want to think about your own audience and purpose. Who would be reading this? Are they people who would want to understand how something is put together so that later they can write an argumentative piece or a persuasive piece? What is your purpose for writing, and how is your paper organized? Then you're going to funnel down a little bit and think about the flow. How are your paragraphs organized? How are the sentences within them? Do you have transitions? Is everything fully developed? Have you included evidence from the article to support your observations? All right, and then, like I said, you're going to move into those later order concerns. You'll notice that the information from Rider University talks about the same thing, that global versus local is higher order versus lower order, but it does give you some strategies for getting into that global revision and that local revision. So both of these will be helpful to you. As you move into the reading for the genre analysis, this is going to come in handy for next week. You will be doing a genre analysis, and in general, when we do an analysis, it helps us understand what makes up a particular genre, and then it helps us pick up the things that are working well. When we have an example, the things that might not be reaching the audience in the right way, but it also gives us a good understanding of that particular genre so that we can, in fact, write something in that genre. So we really dig in and look as we analyze so that it benefits our writing down the road. So in this case, you're going to want to identify, your genre, collect examples of that, examine things like structure and organization, language features, rhetorical strategies, and understand who the audience is and what the purpose for the piece is. And that might vary even within a genre from piece to piece. Audience and purpose are usually specific to a written piece. So you'll want to think about all of that. But like I said, this prepares you for next week, but if you've noticed over the last, really since the beginning of the semester, everything's layered, right? So as you prepare for a written, one of your major writing assignments, there's discussion forums, journals, things that you're reading, all of which are preparing you for either the week that you're in or the next week or even beyond. All right, another thing that we're going to think about is multimodal text. And again, that's going to come in handy as you move through your discussion forums for the next couple of weeks and into the last weeks of the semester. But we have been doing a lot with textual modes of communication. We've been reading print, even if it's digital. There are words on some kind of a page, web page, physical page. I want you to realize that anytime you have more than one of these, you create what we call a multimodal text, or you're reading a multimodal text. So if the text has visual components, that would be a multimodal text. If it's got sound or, gestural, components where, somebody's moving and the body language is saying something. If we look at the way that space is organized, all of these put us into what we call the multimodal text. And so if you think about something like a video, for example, you're going to have maybe some text in it. You'll definitely have some sound in it. I guess you could have silent portions, and that might be for a specific purpose, but ultimately you might have music and narration. You'll have images. You'll have maybe a person moving, so you're reading that body language. Things might be organized spatially. So you want to just think about the fact that this expands our notion of text. We realize that text, can be made up of many different pieces, or it could even be singularly one of these. So, for example, when we listen to podcasts, we're completely in that oral mode of communication. When we look at something like a stop sign, it's completely visual. So you'll just want to think about that. Like I said, this is going to prepare you for this week and beyond, but it also helps you think about things that you might have to do in other classes, but also in the workplace. All right. So then your next reading is on understanding visual rhetoric. And it gives you the example of it's Friday night and you're hungry. The pictures of the food are probably going to be very persuasive as you start to think about what you might want to order or make. It depends. And so ultimately we think about that visual rhetoric, but visual rhetoric is rhetorical in nature too, right? So you're at a restaurant, they're putting images of their food to convince you to order that particular dish. They want it to appeal to you, appeal to your emotions, appeal to ethos, in the sense that now we believe that a cook in that restaurant can make this beautiful piece. So again, visual rhetoric is has many of the same components that a written piece would have. It's organized in a certain way. In this case, you've got a hand holding this particular sandwich. So we've got to think about, why the photographer made that choice as well. All right, now the next piece is introducing you into infographics, or how infographics are made up, because ultimately that's going to help you, think about how, information has been organized in a way that's visually pleasing to you as a consumer of that infographic, but it's also informative. But someone made the choice of how this is organized to best, reach the audience with the information. All right, so that, like I said, leads right into your discussion forum number 5. Of course, you're going to initially post by Thursday, respond by Saturday, but ultimately you're going to select 2 infographics of your choice and detail what their commonalities are. So, in other words, you're going to read the infographics, think about what makes up an infographic, what you read in your lessons and presentations, and you're going to need to post those infographics with your analysis so your classmates can see what you're referencing. You're going to think about what makes up a genre analysis. So here is, a genre, infographics, and you're going to analyze it. So you're going to, identify that genre, which is infographics. You'll collect the samples. You've got 2. You're going to examine their structure and organization, language features. Think about what those, whoever made up this particular infographic is doing rhetorically. Understand what the purpose and audience is, and then you're going to, as you kind of analyze these, think about these steps. So again, kind of mimicking what you saw above, but giving you a little bit more detail, and giving you some ideas of what you might want to consider. Things like color and design, things like the use of text, things like visual elements, in addition to purpose, audience, rhetorical strategies. So that is your discussion form for the week. You also need to upload your final draft of your rhetorical analysis. But as was noted, you're waiting for all of those pieces of feedback. Mine will be the final one, and that will help you to make the decisions on what you're going to revise as you move to the final copy stage of this. And then finally, you've got your writing journal number 5. You'll describe your writing process for the first draft of the rhetorical analysis. What went well, what didn't go well, how did the peer review help you, what parts of the drafting process do you still need good strategies for. This is a nice time to reflect on your use of the writing process and think about what you might need to fine tune as you move through the rest of this course and beyond. And then finally, as always, feel free to ask any questions that you have, and have a wonderful week.